This is supposed to be my vacation. I'm supposed to be posting for other people. Yet here I am, sitting at my computer, instead of lounging in a hammock with something expensive and alcoholic in my hand, writing up what's happened to me, instead of some other poor soul desperate to be heard. I'm the proxy that runs this account. In doing so, I've made myself a target for entities both mundane and supernatural. I thought I was prepared to deal with them. I have wealth, an inheritance from my estranged family that I can use to buy a certain level of physical security. I have power, social connections that came with my family name that I can maintain to keep the government at bay. And finally, I have occult knowledge on one very specific protector in which I have absolute confidence. I just wish he weren't so difficult. Despite all this, I am starting to believe that perhaps I was overconfident in my belief that I was different from the people whose experiences I tell, that what has happened to them couldn't possibly touch me, because I know what horrors are out there and I have ways to combat them. Unfortunately, my success as of late has been poor. My house was raided and they broke my hand. It's healing nicely if you care, although I have some residual weakness that may be permanent. I had a fucking Valran flying through my window, and now there's a corpse hanging from the trees outside my cabin. It's the 6th one this week. I'm thankful that my cabin is isolated, even more so than my house. My house sits on a handful of acres with a fence and a gate, but it is close to material comforts because I enjoy having groceries only 15 minutes away instead of an hour. My cabin sits up on a mountain with a winding dirt road that is nigh impassable in the winter. This suits me nicely because I don't come here in the winter. It is my summer vacation home, and I have invested considerable effort into maintaining both its secrecy and its security. I confess it doesn't have nearly the same level of protection as my home, but I feel I can take a risk here and there. I know I won't be killed. That was the agreement. I've buried the bodies under the back deck. It is elevated enough that I can easily stand under it, but the ground is covered with rocks so that no weeds grow underneath. It makes easy cover for a fresh gravesite. I don't think the police will come looking, but I don't want to make their job easy by being obvious about it. It is a difficult thing to do. I'm not a hardened killer. I do not easily tolerate the sight of suffering or death, despite the things I've stood witness to. I wept as I dug their graves, in anger and frustration, and it took me many, many hours to make the hole deep enough. I am physically weak. My protection saps my strength and wastes away my body, despite my doctor's efforts to dictate a diet that will help me put on some weight. It's less toxic when I let him out to breathe some. Neither of us are comfortable with the collateral damage that incurs, however. I asked once if he would help me while I leaned on my shovel and wiped away sweat. He crouched beside the body, staring down into their face, his expression unreadable. "It's a pity," he said softly, and he made no motion to stand and help dig the hole. He just hovered nearby the entire time, watching the proceedings intently. I suppose his fascination with death is understandable, seeing as he himself will never die. His sorrow, however, is something I don't quite understand, especially given the things he's done. Some things you should know about my protection. He has chosen to take a human form, but he is not human. He can look and act the part, but I have learned to recognize his moments of inhumanity when pieces of his nature bleed through. I do not understand him. It is difficult to explain what he is and how he came to be my constant companion. This much should suffice for now. The people I buried were strangers, taken from the nearby town, I suppose. One wore the uniform of a gas station attendant. Another was older, perhaps in his 70s. A third was filthy, hair matted and reeking of stale urine. Homeless, perhaps. I don't think who they are matters. The thing that's out there is trying to make a point. She doesn't dare get too close to the cabin. I woke on my second night here by a sudden sharp twinge of unease. I rose, knowing to heed these impulses. My bedroom is on the second floor of the cabin, and I walked quietly down the hall to where a balcony overlooks the living room. My protection stood downstairs, by the windows, his fingers touching the glass. I called to him, asking him what was wrong, and he gestured for me to join him. He directed me to look out across the narrow strip of grass to the nearby line of trees. A woman stood there, her skin sallow, her head docked so that her chin touched her chest. Her grey-brown hair was matted and hung in thick ropes over her shoulders. She stood unnaturally still. The leaves rustled with the night breeze, but the tattered hem of her stained white dress did not stir. I felt her gaze on me, like fingers creeping along the back of my arms, and I suppressed a shiver. "Why is she still following me?" I hissed. "Didn't I scare her off once already?" I will summarize for you. The woman in the woods is normally a benign, reclusive creature that lurks in a narrow strip of forest in an otherwise unremarkable town. The locals leave her tribute on a rock, coins and trinkets, before walking the path that wound through her woods. My client's friends have been stealing the tribute. I contacted the client shortly after one of their friends was reported missing, and they asked if I would post what was happening, so that someone would know the truth. They sent me the final details on their phone, and that was the last time we were in contact. I know what happened to them after that, but I do not embellish the things I post with my own knowledge. It is theirs to tell, and theirs alone. This is a rule of mine. Now, however, it seems I'd attracted the attention of the woman in such a way that she was willing to leave her woods behind in order to come hunt me down. She'd come to my house first, lurking in the trees, unwilling to venture across my yard. I'd gone outside and she'd slunked off, and I thought that had been the end of it. "Do I need to go confront her again?" I snarled. "She knows I can end her." "She knows I can end her," the protection corrected. "Your capability is a little more uncertain." "I'm going back to bed. Destroy her if she comes any closer to the house." I felt his eyes on my back as I left. I am still uncertain if he was compelled to follow my orders, or if he chooses to do so. But I know he detests them. I pay for them, each and every one. But I was angry, and that made me thoughtless. I have not yet paid for this particular command, but I will. He doesn't forget. In the morning, I went into the kitchen and started the coffee brewing. I took a mug from the cupboard with my left hand, the weak one, and happened to glance out of the window above the sink. A body hung from the great oak tree that sits in the backyard. A man, his abdomen torn open and emptied as he hung from a noose woven out of his own intestines. My hand faltered and the mug fell to the ground and shattered. "Oh," my protection said when he appeared to see what the noise was, glancing out of the window, upon which my gaze was fixed. "That." "You knew?" I gasped, finally ripping my eyes from the ghastly scene. He regarded me with mild indifference. "I assumed you'd heard the screaming." I had not. He tutted at me in disappointment, and explained that it had started shortly after midnight, a good distance out in the woods, past my property line, beyond what was considered mine, meaning that I had no right to interfere. "It lasted for some time," he continued. "Likely the woman in the woods meant for me to hear it, and know that was the fate she had in mind for me, should I ever fall into her hands." "How much did you drink last night?" my protection asked critically. "Some." He raised an eyebrow. "Enough that I wouldn't easily wake up," I mended. "I might have taken some medication as well." "I can't protect you from yourself," he sighed, and then he was gone, leaving me to deal with the body. The next day, there was another body. I was bracing for it this time, steeling myself before looking out the window. It wasn't enough. My will was not prepared. She'd left this one alive, impaled on a broken branch, hanging limply, with limbs dangling, weak from blood loss, and unable to struggle any longer. Her eyes locked on mine, pleading for help, but even I could tell she was beyond saving. Nothing left to do but make a quick end of it. But I was frozen in place. My protection touched my shoulder. I felt his breath on the back of my head as he looked over me and sighed. "I'll take care of it," he murmured. And he did, and in such a way that I didn't feel so drained for a few days in sustaining my half of our agreement. Another morning, another body. By this point, I was deeply shaken and angry at my own helplessness. I thought myself immune to this rage and frustration at not being able to stop something so horrific. I live it through my clients, knowing what has happened to them, but being too remote to do anything other than write down their words and share it with others so that they aren't alone. This was personal, however, and I found my prior indifference was insufficient to combat the emotions I was feeling. I decided to go into town. It was small, and there would be rumours of people vanishing, surely. Perhaps they would yield some kind of pattern, some way to predict who the woman in the woods would take, and I could get ahead of her. My protection had already cautioned me against blindly going out into the woods at night to stop her. It was taboo to steal the prey of another predator, and at some point, he would not be able to keep me safe if I insisted on angering everything that was out there. If I preempted her, however, that could be different. Protecting someone altered the situation significantly. I got in my car and began to drive into town. I was halfway down the mountain trail when I saw her, standing by the side of the road. She raised a hand, pointing a skeletal finger at me. I hit the brakes instinctively, and I caught a slight movement from the other hand, stretching out a jagged nail to touch the trunk of the tree she stood next to. A crack, a groan, and the tree began to fall, ponderously. I swore, jamming my car into reverse and slamming on the gas. It lurched backwards, just as the tree came down with a scream of shattering wood. I cried out and threw up my arms, recoiling in reflex, and the car stalled and lurched to a halt. The world grew silent. I could hear my blood throbbing in my ears. The tree was massive, an old maple with a trunk thick enough to have easily crushed me. It had narrowly missed my car. With shaking hands, I reached for the key to restart the engine. The woman slammed into my windshield. She sprawled across it, limbs askew, and her skin left a black trail of ichor where she touched the glass. Her face was level with mine, her mouth agape to reveal a line of pointed teeth, the bottom and top row, nothing but canines. Her throat was black like charcoal, and her eyes were vacant sockets, the white skin curving inwards along the line of the bone, blackening at the back of the pit like a bruise. She slammed a hand on the windshield, and the glass cracked, lines shooting out from the point of impact, like a cobweb. I swore vehemently and pressed my fingertips together before me. Simply starting the car wouldn't be enough. I needed to get her off. Another impact. The glass bowed inwards. I felt a churning in my chest, at the base of my sternum. And the third impact put a hole clear through. It happened too quickly. I heard a crack like a gunshot, and then there were bony, ice-cold fingers around my neck, digging past the tendons, and I couldn't breathe. She leered at me, twisting her wrist, dragging me forwards towards a crumbling windshield. I pulled my hands apart. My palms burned, a caustic chemical feeling. I wrapped them around her wrist and I pushed, I willed, and the woman recoiled. She screeched, and for a moment I could only curl up and scream, covering my ears as they popped, and then the car shuddered, and when I opened my eyes, she was gone. I felt liquid trickling down the inside of my fingers, and I scrubbed at my earlobes with the back of my hands. They came away, smeared with dark blood. For a few minutes, I sat in my car, numb, heart pounding, staring blankly at the wooden windshield. My protection had appeared in the passenger seat beside me, bare feet propped up on the dash, like some teenager out on a drive. He never wears shoes. It's another quirk I don't understand. Road is blocked, he said. She tried to kill me, I whispered. Of course she tried to kill you, he sighed. If you understood the full scope of all the things out there, that would happily kill you if given the opportunity. You'd never leave your house. None of you humans would. And yet, even that wouldn't be enough to save you. Haven't you figured that out by now, after writing down and telling those stories about what happened to all those other people? Why didn't you save me? You had it under control. A pause. And sometimes you need to be reminded that you aren't invincible, simply because of our agreement. Are you going to drive us back to the cabin? You know I can't. I have no idea how to operate a car. Or would you prefer to walk the rest of the way? I turned the car on, stirred into motion by his barb. I had no choice but to turn back. The road was blocked. The woman watched me leave, and I understood what she was signalling. I would not leave my cabin until she permitted it. Bruises were already wrapped around my neck, mottled purple and black, starting just behind the ears and wrapping all the way around to the swell of my throat. It hurts to move my head. I called the nearby town to find out who was responsible for clearing roads. I then inquired as to who I could hire to get it done faster. The woman in the woods killed one of their workers that night, but at least they'd gotten the tree removed before that happened. She left his body on the hood of my car, and I had to spray his blood off with a hose. That was a 5th victim. I found the 6th this morning, out by the tree line. A small body, smaller than the others, and when I saw it, I held my coffee mug at the wall with a cry of anger. I called for my protection, demanded he appear and go deal with this, but he remained silent and absent. Finally, I made for the door. I would handle her myself. I have some skill in the occult, after all. I am not some mewling wretch, subject to the whims of powers greater than me, terrified in the teeth of the monsters that stalk our world. My protection met me at the door. He put a palm against my chest, and I seized his wrist. It was like trying to move stone. I cursed him. "This is not how you should handle this," he said urgently. "Yes, I believe you can destroy her, and if you can't, then I'll be forced to intervene and finish her off. But you know why she torments you, and I warned you that this could happen. I'm a proxy for people who encounter the monsters and the darkness that lurks all around us. I am their voice. Not all of my clients survive their ordeals. I keep a scrapbook of the ones that died. In it is a page for a girl, aged 12 years. I went to her funeral. I walked the path. I left my tribute, and my protection whispered to me that perhaps this was unwise, as the rules change when other beings of power are involved. He reminded me, carefully, for it is not something I like to hear, that I may still be human, but I don't count as human, the way other people do. He reminds me of this now. My tribute appears to have been insufficient. There's a pattern to these things, unwritten rules. We are both predators, myself and the woman in the woods. I am human, but I am also a little more, and trinkets and loose change is not a suitable gift from someone like me. I think I have a way to resolve this. I will follow tradition and make amends for the paltry gift I left upon that rock. The body remains where she left it, and she stands nearby, watching the house. I'm going to relocate it soon. It won't be buried with the rest. I'll leave it somewhere it can be found. The parents deserve that much. I've been making phone calls all morning. I decided to go to the cabin to escape from what happened to me. I wanted to give my security service time to fix the problems they identified from the assault on my house. They confirmed for me over the phone that they've isolated the leak in their workforce. I've requested the privilege of determining what is done with him and paid a substantial sum to secure that agreement. It's already in motion. He's been apprehended. I only need to post this and then get in my car, cutting short my vacation, I'll have you know, and then drive the many hours it'll take to arrive in that insignificant town, with the bike path and the rock where the children and adults alike leave behind their pennies and their trinkets. The security force will meet me there, and they'll have their saboteur with them. I'm going to leave behind his head. I believe that will satisfy the woman in the woods. Blood sacrifice is the most ancient and honourable form of tribute, and for the people that raided my house, for I am certain that they are hearing this. You didn't honestly expect to do what you did without retaliation.